Started, everyone. I'd like to get everyone's attention. Welcome to our April working group meeting. Thanks to those who are joining us on Teams, which I'll get to in a second. We've been a Zoom group for a while, and we've shifted to Teams. So hopefully everyone has made that transition with us. I'm Andrew Bing. I facilitate the working group meetings. Thanks to our working group members who are here, as well as a couple members of the public who are here. We thank you for being here. And as everyone knows by now, or should know, it's always worth reminding, these meetings are for the working group members. So if you're a member of the public who joined us online or here at the library, thank you, first of all. But we will be focusing our questions and our discussion with the working group members, and we will save time at the end for any public comment. So before we get into our agenda, as we do all the time, we're going to have our project manager, Austin Gray, come up and give us our safety update.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. As I mentioned, my name is Austin Gray. I'm the project manager for the 5-Plan Study and also the assistant director for Delaware Planning. Every presentation that Delaware gives starts with our mission statement, which is to there it is, which is to provide excellence in transportation for every trip, every move, every dollar, and every one. We also start all the presentations off with the most recent traffic fatalities. So you'll see, as of last Thursday, we were at 23 year to date. I think the number's up to 24 as of today. So we're still, trending in the right direction, right? But the goal always is 0 for those numbers. Especially being that, Delaware is one of the highest ranked states for pedestrian fatalities. You see we're pretty close to on par with where we were at this time last year and the year before. So that's a number that I think is worth, all the numbers are obviously important to watch, but that's a number especially I think is important as well. This is a new slide probably for many of you. This is a formal policy that Delaware has now adopted. It's called the state system approach. So you'll be seeing this in all of our presentations moving forward. This is a policy that has been in place at the federal level with US DOT for a few years now. We decided to formally accept it. This has been the direction the department's been moving in generally anyway, but it takes a more proactive approach with a lot of the engineering and design work that we're doing with our studies as well as the planning work. So around the side of the circle, you'll see the kind of the principles, right, of the state system approach. So death and serious injuries are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes. Humans are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared. Safety is proactive, and redundancy is crucial. So that's the framework and guiding principles. And then in the spokes in the center of the wheel are kind of those specific measures that we're looking to address, right? So safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer roads, post crash care. Certainly, these are not all strictly DelDOT jobs, right? Lots of collaboration work with other agencies, state police, Office of Highway Safety groups like that, right? Lots of partners and coordination, collaboration required. But this is kind of the approach that we're going to be taking and publicizing with a lot of our efforts. So you will see this every time you hear from DelDOT, I'm sure. And with that, I will turn it back over to Andrew to walk everyone through the rest of the agenda.
All right, thanks, Austin. I mean, what did you say? We're 23 or 24 fatalities? 24. I saw the quote that said, "I'd rather fail at meeting a very ambitious goal than succeed at meeting a really easy goal." And I mean, obviously, that's about as ambitious a goal as you can get to 0 fatalities, and it's a great goal to have, even though there's a lot outside DelDOT's control in trying to achieve that. Did I stall long enough?
Yeah, you did great.
Okay, so our agenda's up there. Am I able to just use the arrows?
Yes, sir.
So we will do introductions, and then we will get a presentation from Dan Blevins with WMAPCO about demographics and aging in the state of Delaware. I think that this agenda today can be summed up. We're going to share a lot of, I think, pretty interesting information. I hope you guys do, and I think it's going to make us all kind of get some light bulb moments about a lot of the things that are happening, in the state and in this area. We'll have a presentation on demand modeling and corridor studies, as well as the latest on our TID, the Henlopen TID, Transportation Improvement District. We'll have Leah do our phase 2 information status, and as I said, we will, if there is anyone who wants to make a public comment, we'll do that at the end. Obviously, we'll allow for questions and comments throughout, and I'll try to keep us on track and get us out of here. It is nice coming to a meeting and having it be daylight. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get out of here when it's still daylight? I don't, that would be an ambition. One I'm not sure we're gonna get to. All right.
Did I lie to you?
Yes, you
Is
did.
it not right?
Okay, as I mentioned, we've switched over to Teams. I'm not really sure why, but at any rate, I think that's just what DelDOT is moving forward with. So for those working group members who are on, you'll see raise the hand feature, the third one over. Just click on that. That'll let us know if you want to jump in, or just jump in if you can find a time to be able to get on, unmute and ask a question. We'll take the time for that. So let's do introductions. I know Stephanie Johnson is on, the new Director of Planning at, is there more to that title than Director of Planning? No, it's just Director of Planning, right? Yes, Lloyd Schmidt's on, as well as Todd Lawson are on by virtually. I just thought it'd be easier to do it that way, but why don't we start with Councilman Riley? We'll go around the room and just do introductions.
Oh, you just did. I'm Riley, Fifth District, Plus County.
Oh, before you go, Mary, we've got our friend the owl here. Again, let's do everything we can do to try to project so that not only people can hear us, but that the recording, people can go back and know who's talking. So go ahead, Mary.
Mary Roth, Delaware Greenways and Historic Lewes Byway.
Kathy Coleman, resident, Villages of Five Points.
Pete Matson, St. Judy Apostle Church.
Jane Greenville, County Council, District 3.
Bob Fisher, engineering, retired system engineer, volunteer going back to the first meeting, haven't missed one yet, hope I'm alive for the last one.
Delaware Bicycle Council.
PJ Hughes, traffic engineer for sure, Hughes LLC.
Bill Davis, Sussex County Association of Realtors. Scott Collins, Planning and Zoning Commission.
The Russell School Senator for the 6th District. Hello, Scott Thomas, Southern Delaware Tourism and CDAT.
Great. I want to just, first of all, Councilman Ruban, thank you for being here. I know you were on by Zoom, but this is your first meeting in person. I already mentioned that Director Johnson, this is her first meeting, so we appreciate you being here as our new representative, and we thank Pam Steinbach, who served in that role and was a member of this working group. I do want to just make note that Lloyd Schmitz is on. Lloyd has been on, much like Bob Fisher, since the very start of this. Lloyd indicated to me today that this will be his last meeting. He is going to relinquish his responsibilities, not just on this committee, but others. He's helping out at home a little bit more and just wants to have some time to do other things. So I just want to give Lloyd a round of applause and thank him in the beginning.
Thank you, Andrew.
And Lloyd, thank you again. Your perspective has been invaluable through every phase of this effort, and we're happy you're not going to have as many responsibilities, but we'll miss you as part of this committee. So in your materials, pretty much standard, we have our agenda. The full presentation is in front of you. So if the glare is making it hard to see until it shifts, you can use your presentation. We have our draft minutes of our last meeting on January 27th, our list of upcoming meetings, as well as our updated implementation plan. So you should all have that. And there are copies of the agenda in the back for any member of the public who's going to grab that. I do want to just move on to our approval of the minutes from January 27th. If anyone has a question or a comment before we do that, I would take a motion to accept those minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilman Riley. And I see a second from Ralph. Again, any questions before we move forward? And again, for everyone, we record these, but we also just like to also do those minutes just to make it easier. But if anyone ever wanted to go back and hear word for word what was said, that's probably the cleanest and easiest way to do that. So with that, all in favor of accepting the January 27, 2025 meeting minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Anyone abstaining? Okay, great. Then we will move forward. So, I'm really looking forward to hearing from, our colleague from Wilmapco. Wilmapco has some great people and, Dan is, certainly knowledgeable, smart, entertaining, and that's just when he talks about baseball. I don't know what he's gonna do here when he actually talks about demographics, but, I get to work with Dan a lot up in Newcastle County, and I think, this will be informative. So, Dan bless.
Yeah, evening. Yeah, I know this is the kickoff for Data Palooza today. Looks like the agenda has a lot of numbers and stuff like that, so I'll try to edit some pretty pictures, so hopefully that'll help kind of ease the pain a little bit. But I was asked to come down here and talk. Yes, I am from the Wilmington Area Plan Council, but I also serve on the Delaware Population Consortium, so kind of running my other hat today for this year. What I got prepared is, I'm not, obviously, you're having, population growth down here and things of that nature. So I'm skipping a lot of that, trying to get to some of the inner pieces of that and what's kind of happening, trend wise and kind of where we are heading in the future on a few things. So, fortunately, I had a lot of things in the pipeline here that were part of our presentation I did for the University of Delaware last year, challenges and considerations for transportation needs. So it has a little bit of that flavor to it. And, at that meeting, we started here with a bunch of these questions here that you can see about, when we're looking at transportation, obviously it comes down to demographics on, what the population is and what we're trying to serve and what type of mode of transportation we have. So all these questions are here, how old are we getting? Where are we getting old? Have people living in group quarters, nursing homes? These are all these questions that we try to find ways to come up with the crystal ball and whatnot. For those who've been in my office, I have a magic 8-ball on my desk, so sometimes that works just as well to shake that to see what we have here. But all of these things here are important pieces of that puzzle to try to figure out to help us all do our work for transportation planning, other infrastructure, things of that nature. But for what we do, mostly it's going to be looking on the transportation side. The national snapshot, just kind of starting there. United States, is growing, but it's slow. Our population continues to grow. The last full census was the slowest rate of growth that we had in the entire nation. And as I see deaths, deaths are catching, and actually in many places they've caught up to birth. So we're having natural increase, mainly sometimes with where our population would grow. Many places that's actually going negative. Back in 2018, 2019, there's only 4 states that had that number where there's more deaths than births. Since from 2020 to 2024, that number is about up to 18. And as you can see at the very, very far part on the corner there, Delaware is included in that. So for the last 4 years, we have a net negative growth simply by by births versus deaths. That's a statewide figure. So the consortium, what do we do? Part of our task is to look every year to come up with a single set of projections that can be publicly available for people to use for general planning purposes. It's a group that we have about 18 people, all state agencies, NPOs, certain towns, and the like are part of that, where we start with the county or states and counties, and then we have other tabulations. We get down to smaller areas of geography, which I'll get into very shortly. What we do is we look at, looking at every race, ethnicity, age, this and that and the other, for trying to figure out what population we have here now, which we'll be able to generate in terms of population, both in births and mortality, migration, and also labor force and employment by place of work. So our idea is kind of take all that information together and put something out here that all of us can use for doing all of our planning for whatever purpose it may be. So always talked about the aging population. The baby boomers are always brought up, usually kind of get picked on a little bit for some of the things that are being caused, but go back in all the different generations and whatnot. But I put a spot there that says we are here. We've kind of reached peak baby boom in terms of our population number here. And as you can see, the green area, I don't know how hard it is to see up there, but the top part in green is Sussex County. So we're kind of right there at the peak. By 2029, all the baby boomers will have reached the age of 65. Those were born from 1964 onward or before that. So just going to give you a general flavor on where we're going with that piece of our population was something that was brought up a significant amount at our summer meeting. What do we have right now from the consortium? We just did a projection series back in January of this year for the 2024 year. You can see the three lines right there, Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex. The Sussex line in green. Sussex itself has been net negative in births versus deaths. It's had more deaths than births since 2013. If you look at Newcastle and Kent, they're kind of sliding that way as well. So really by 2033, none of the counties in Delaware will have that positive birth rate. And yes.
Methodology, just to make sure I understand what you're saying. You include the people who live here and continue to live here, and that's where deaths and births are really important. Is that?
There's probabilities to that, yes.
Let me just finish. And then you include those who move out because they're going to go out of the population. But most importantly, since so many people are moving to Delaware, especially in Sussex County, you are taking that into account as well. And this is the composite of those three individual pieces, correct? That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, but it's something that's done every year. I mean, because no matter when the migration happens, those numbers, the calculus changes every year. That's why at the consortium, we do this every year, project early, project often, when it comes to that, because that debt gets reshuffled each year based upon the migration part. It is the most unpredictable part of what we do because of what's being imported in versus births over deaths. That's a little bit more predictable what you can look at with the parcel population that you have. Okay. So moving ahead, getting into kind of some of the kind of the end results we'll be seeing here. What you see here on the chart on the screen here right now is looking at strictly the 65 and over population. Forecasting out ahead right now, we're seeing that if you look at really 2030, that is actually going to be the peak of that we're seeing going back to the baby boomer chart that we had there. You can see by 2030 for pretty much all of Delaware there, that's about roughly the high water mark when it comes to that aging of the population. As you see in 2040 and 2050, pretty much for Kent and Newcastle, it kind of flattens out. But in Sussex, as you see, begins to trend downward a little bit more. I'm showing you some of these things up front so that I can simply get right to some of the some of the internal things that we're seeing, specific to Sussex County. So just by each county, looking at the age here, didn't show up here, but the numbers on the far right there in yellow, that one single percentage there, that is percent of growth that's being driven by the 65 and over population. And for what you'll see is most of the things are going to be showing up here going forward. You're going to see the entire state. So I think it's important to see the comparisons between the two on what's happening as we start looking a little bit more locally here. And as you can see here, you look at Newcastle, almost all the growth and then some is being driven by the 65 and over population. As you look down towards Sussex County, you can see actually most of the rest of the growth is going to be coming from a younger population. Everybody, there's obvious reasons that you can see behind that about as people are moving here, different jobs and goods and services are needing to be provided. So it's becoming, a better employment draw for, a younger piece of the population. So kind of went over the big stuff first here to kind of get into, the factors about what's changing it from a local. This is one of the coolest charts the census put out. Is something they did. This is from 2022, from 2020 to 2022. It's looking at the net migration, domestic migration throughout the entire United States, where different pieces of the population, anything you see in blue is where people move to. You see anything in the brown or orange, that's where people moved from. Very distinct. Most of the major metro areas, emptied out, where they went to some of the other more rural areas that you see in blue, mainly in Florida. But so you see, as you look at Florida here, this is looking at just the top 10, across the country here. You see that Florida is, yes, the number one in net domestic migration. However, going back to the other chart there, they're at a net negative natural increase. So they're kind of, it's the only way they're really growing right now is through this here. More specifically, looking at Delaware, Pennsylvania, they love Delta. So for the last 4 years, this is what you've seen has really been from Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York are the top four where we have imported people into Delaware. Now, people have left and gone back. So this is the net change that we've had from those, really the top 40s. Looking at just the counties right now, just the net domestic migration going back to 2010. Knowing that I've already mentioned that, Sussex County has been pretty much net negative, where the growth has come from. You see the blue area, the lines in green on here. I'm not sure how well it's, and looks pretty good out there. It's not bad, not bad. Okay. That's Sussex County. So you can see where, from the net domestic migration, and you can see from 2020 onward, the, what's called the COVID bubble, that we had seen. Now that we got 2024 data available now, you can start seeing that, was a bit of a bubble moving through. But yes, most of it has resided down here in Sussex County. Again, don't think it's a surprise to anybody here. However, when you look at the state international migration, as you see here, Sussex doesn't really register that much at all. And honestly, Delaware just hasn't been a big place for international migration, in its entirety, except for the last 2 to 3 years, especially 2024, where we've seen the jump here in Newcastle County.
By that, do you mean undocumented?
That's, and just coming, if where you resided last year was from somewhere else other than the United States. Yeah. So, continuing with Sussex County here, okay, looking.
You said there's a big spike in 2024 in Newcastle County. Did I hear you say that you thought that was just, is that going to continue, that kind of spike? That's a one-time event?
I would not think so, depending on how the current policies are. And without getting into that conversation too much here, this may be a residual of what previous administrations did or that. But again, as I said before, when we put these together, it is the hardest thing to predict, to try to look for any type of trends. If I went back, I know I'm making Andrew nervous over here by going backwards on these things. But as you can see, you're looking at migration, looking at Newcastle County alone, we went negative before. And, now we're back to a positive. So these things really kind of bounce back and forth. So it is rather difficult to try to make a trend out. So looking at obviously age, the age of the population comes into it without going too much into this here. So I've already mentioned it a lot. Looking at that, this is this annual growth by age in Sussex County alone. As you can see, pre-COVID, those numbers were, mid 2000s, throughout the county here. What happened in 2021 onward? Yes, it was an active spike that drove the, drove the growth in just Newcastle County, mainly at that 65 and over population. Now, getting into, I think I need to go to this one first. I'm going to talk a little bit about some geography right now, as a lot of the things I'm going to be showing here soon are going to revolve around. There is a level of geography that the census puts out. It's called the planning district. And you can see the map on the right there. There are 10 within Sussex County alone. Mainly, they have some reasonably familiar names. Milford, Lewes, Georgetown, Seaford. Those are just larger areas of geography. For something like this, it makes it easier than to try to show a lot of small, central fragment things of that nature. So, trying to take a look at what we've seen in recent trends about what and where people are moving, a little bit more closer detail into Sussex County. Looking back from 2009 to 2022, looking at the age of household. We've already mentioned a lot going back on what we've seen before already with the 65 million population, but this gets a little bit more detail into where places within Sussex County. And I highlighted in the box there the 65 to 74 and 74 to 85 age bracket. When you look at you look at Lewes and you look at the Selbyville, Bethany Beach area, that's been quite a jump. But more importantly, you see some of the younger ages of householders really haven't grown that much at all. So really what a lot of the, households that we're seeing here are in that 65, 75-year-old age bracket. Yeah, that one's. So kind of going to run through some of these things. You're just looking at, going back in time a little bit, because yes, as part of what we do is at the consortium is yes, looking back, rear mirror look is a very big help at times, just kind of see where things have trended toward, and gives us a little bit of glean of what we've seen, and allows a little bit more perspective in the work that we do here, because when you start looking at some of the trends throughout the entire state, northern Newcastle County versus southern Newcastle County, or even what's happening in the resort areas here, you start to get a better glean. So we've added roughly about 222,000 people in the last 22 years in all of Delaware. It's still reasonably split. 72,000 in Newcastle and 91,000 down here. Obviously, the percentages look a little bit different here, but so this is kind of a gee whiz number here, just of total population. But digging into that a little bit more, 65 and over population, you start seeing a little bit more of a trend. As much as it is talked about down here that, the Lewes area and whatnot are seeing, 5,000, 6,000. The MOT area is really the third highest in the state right now. That area just has, granted its geography is a little bit bigger, but there are areas that are seeing, rather significant growth in the 65 and over population as well. And I've been doing these little presentations since I think about 2003, thinking of looking at 85 and over population was, and then you can really think about that, but we certainly add that here, which then does become another harder thing to do when we start looking more locationally, is because, people can be aging in place, but this can be dictated by, the availability of assisted living facilities, the Pike Creek, Brandywine area in Newcastle County, there's a lot more of a concentration of that. So where they're being counted can skew that a little bit, going ahead. But, overall, yes, we're seeing that number starting to climb in the areas that we've talked about before, and even around the area of Smyrna. This one gets talked about very little, and I won't get on the soapbox here, but this is looking at the population under 18. Certainly down here in the southern part of Delaware, yes, there's certainly a lot of positive numbers. North of the canal is negative 12,000 since 2000. So when you start looking at resources about allocating for things for schools and whatnot, all the growth has literally been south of the canal. So when we start looking at that under 18 population, thinking of schools, for instance, we're sitting in here right now, those things start to make, start to paint a little bit of a different picture here. The one thing that, kind of getting the kind of the meat of some of the things here about what we've seen that starts driving a lot of our work here is the amount of people living in each household. That is something that since 2000 and going forward, that number has begun to grow and shrink rapidly. The number of people within each house, going back in time where you had, more of a traditional nuclear family with children and things of that nature, those are starting to whittle away a bit. And we're seeing that obviously nationwide. And it's something that we're seeing, within each county here. So this is looking at, so I didn't include the single person of all ages. It's just looking at the 65 and over population living alone. So this is something that we hit when I did this for the Biden Center IPA, was a discussion on aging. So when this was here, just looking at the 65 and over population. So as you can see here, we've added 22,000 households of just somebody 65 and over living alone. And that's scattered throughout the, throughout the state here, but you're seeing the common places, Lewes, you're seeing the MOT area of Newcastle, where we're starting to see that. I added this smaller chart here, for those who know John Sisson, who is the head of DART DTC. I do this every year for our council, put together a presentation like this, and he just does this every year. He goes, because putting these together, his job is to say, okay, where these populations are, and you can see some of the darker areas on the map showing the higher concentrations. A lot of these are grouping away from where they currently have their service. So as part of what we do is putting this together. We share this with John because he has to try to make heads or tails out of this on how he provides services. And as people move down here, from other states, they start asking those questions. Well, where is this? Where's that? And then the demand starts. So I make him sad every year. When I start putting some of these together because of where, as I mentioned before about, how are we getting older, and more importantly, where are we getting older? Starts to ring bells on how we're able to administer the services for these areas. Back to that question here that kind of the kind of sums a lot of things up here is that between family versus non-family. So something that the term that the census uses. So pretty much, family is just two or more people that are together by birth, marriage, adoption, or residing together. That's what you consider a family. Then you look at non-family households. That's you could be roommates and or living alone. Those are two things how the census breaks that up, and that's something that we've seen within all the counties right here. You see I guess I can move over a little bit. You see the charts here from 2000 for family, and then 2000 to 2023 for non-family. As you can see here, this was the family's household size in 2000. This is 2023. The non-family households, you can see right there. So Sussex County, for instance, has seen a rather hefty drop in those household sizes for families. Newcastle and Kent County has seen the same as well. But if you look at the non-family, you see how much smaller it is. When you look at the number of people per household. So then if you see the charts to the right there, if you look at Newcastle County, 2/3 of our household growth have been non-family households. So that means 2/3 of our house have 1.2 people. If you look at down in Sussex County, it's not as much, but it's roughly 1/3. So 1/3 of the household you're adding have 1.2 people. Theoretically, when you look at this going ahead, is like you actually have, if you even have zero population growth, you're adding households because households have still generally become, have been on the shrinking side. And that's something that we're kind of generally seeing here going throughout. I think I will note in your handout there, this chart will look a little bit different. So we had put this in here, but roughly, if you look at all the different areas of Sussex County, it's roughly about 1 out of 3 households is what you would call a non-family household.
You think that's a function with high home prices?
No, it's simply part is age structure. Part of it is different different lifestyle choices about not having kids or anything of that nature. In your living ones, there's a few different pieces of that. As you can see that throughout different parts of the state where you would have that. Newark has an extremely high. If you look at the non-family households in there, it's like 5. But that's because it's a college campus. You have all the people living in. It's still a non-family household. They're not related. So sometimes those numbers will look at that. A lot of it, hence the reason I had the 65 and over single person household. Most of that number, the non-family, is single person households. So that number, going through, random life cycle, kids move away, the spouses move together, and they're still there. So there was a lot of reasons that's happening. Kind of why I brought up the age of householder that's happening now down here, and it's something that John Sisson has, kind of listened to, and on the transportation side, that is what we're planning for, at least now in the near term, going all the way back to the beginning, we saw where the 65 and over begins tailing the other way. That number will begin to shuffle again 15, 20 years from now. So it's welcome to our world. And we try to put these together because there is a lot of those changing dynamics, and every year that number, gets changed, especially when we're looking at the migration part, trying to factor those in. But yeah, that's what we've seen. So that's what we've seen now, and that's why I went back to 20 years to do that, because we're still seeing that number carry on today. So one of the things we've honed in to try to get the message across, at least from the transportation side, what we're seeing throughout these when we put these projection series together, some of the inner workings for it. Thanks. Oh, I know. Oops. Last one I have here, and it's something that was brought up, is like, okay, well, what does that matter about what we have in terms of, revenues for doing different, different things, or what are we getting from tax revenue from the population? So without going too far into that, I look back, the furthest year we have is 2006 out to 2023. Of the households, whether the percentage of populations that have earnings, which means they have a job and they're getting money through, that type of income, who was getting it from Social Security, retirement, they even added food stamps on there. But when you start looking at the, Social Security and retirement, they all get taxed differently at different rates than somebody with a regular job. So that certainly starts to matter what comes into the coffers on each one. And I did point out, the Lewes and the Shelbyville, area, they have more than half of the people are receiving Social Security and or retirement income. So depending on you got 401, Roth, depending on what that is, pre-taxed or not, as they're here, it all depends on how much you're getting in terms of income from there to help provide some of the services that people are looking for.
But since you're talking about income, obviously on that chart, the state doesn't currently tax Social Security, so you're not getting any income from the state there. But a major source of revenue would be the property values of the people that are living here. So do you is there some way for you to estimate that? So that, like when you're talking about things that depend on property taxes, and are you only talking about how to spend state income tax money, or what is the purpose of this? If you're looking for state income tax money, well, it doesn't count Social Security, right?
It's something that comes up a lot in our discussions about, well, what does it mean when you have a quick growth in that, at a certain age of population? What does it do for your revenues, about looking at services and things of that nature? Yeah, we can go, if I could figure out what people would have in overall property value, and in a wrong job. That'd be a much better thing to have there. But in short, I know I went through an awful lot of material. Yeah, that was just in case.
Okay.
Yeah, in case it burns. Now, so certainly that's why I'm glad you're ready to make copies of this here, because there is an awful lot of info that goes into that. As I mentioned before, the consortium, we do it every year at this group. We just had our first meeting here to kind of start looking at moving ahead on this. But there's a little bit of the under the hood of what we look at when we put this together.
So let's I have a few questions. DJ?
Yes, so I'm just wondering, I don't think I heard anything about seasonal population,
We do that too. Yes.
because that's obviously, and then I think,
I only had 20 minutes, so.
right. So, and also I think since 2020, has there been any way of classifying the homes that were second homes, but now you have fully remote jobs where people are living in Delaware and working in other states?
Well, more than anecdotally, yes. With some of the information we get from the ACS, there was a column there about how mode to work, and there's walk, bike, car, train, work at home, and that number in certain spots, let's say Bethany, went from like 14% to 34%. Already starting to go back down the other way now. So there are bits and pieces. Does it get into a lot of what we do with the consortium? Not really, but that's a little bit of an idea on, obviously anecdotally, people who were able to say, oh, I got a beach house, or why am I hanging out here? We can go down there. How many people were able to make that full time? That's the difference now, whether, as businesses are saying you have to come back to the office, does that change? So there's still that nebulousness of what.
But when you're in large, the population numbers are not accounting for people that basically converted their beach home to.
Some of the things get pulled out, we look at the number of occupied households that come out each year from the census. That helps us with looking at year to year changes. But yes, real quick on we do a full thing of this for the for seasonal, but I haven't had so much time to.
Because I think the seasonal is also grown too, where it's more into the shoulder seasons in the spring and the fall, especially weather driven.
Yeah, we basically put together one would be what you call a peak, what looks like in the middle of July. So we just use that as kind of our base point there, how long that would last. I know that's something that I don't take any Ben's thunder if he's talking about that as he does his stuff. So I'll save that for yours.
Scott, yeah, Scott Thomas, yeah, as an add-on to DJ's question, I saw seasonal was a subset.
It is something, yes.
And I'm curious if the consortium has, any slides that show that data, and second part of the question is, obviously you're using census data, but are you using AI tools to show what's happening certain times of year with that seasonal visitation? And I know a lot of our towns are starting to look at that. So I'm wondering what type of tools you use with that, because there is such a dynamic movement and it's such valuable information for this and for a lot of applications.
What I'll do is I will be able to give that to Austin, and he can share with this group here.
Okay.
But Andrew's getting nervous up here.
I'm not nervous.
Yeah, but short answer is yes, we do have that available, but we talk about the methodology that goes into it. We do look at things that we get from Delaware, looking at traffic volumes to see what it looks like July versus October, to kind of get those ideas, because on top of just, you have we know where the vacant homes are that are, for rent. We know where the hotels are, campgrounds, we have all that. It's just a matter of when you look at the true one, how do you count for day trippers? So we look at noon on a Saturday, July 17th, what would it look like, because you have the day trippers down there. What does that true number look like? So we look at some of the traffic volumes to help going into the travel demand model. That's like,
So, yeah, we'll wrap this up. Are you sitting on your thing?
I am. Okay,
But,
listen to
we, if anyone has any other questions, we can get to it, but so much, oftentimes we speak very anecdotally about what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, and I just think it was important to have someone like Dan here to really, shed some light on actual numbers. As he said, it's hard to build trends based on this, but, certainly this is an aging population. We all kind of reflect that in one way or another. So what does that mean for this area? What does that mean for planning and some of the studies and, decisions that the county has to make and things like that. So hopefully that was interesting, but we're going to move on to Ben. We'll have to talk about transportation demand modeling for corridor studies.
Well, all right. Yeah, you queued me up well, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Ben Gruswitz. I'm with WRA, and happy to kind of continue the data palooza, continuing this sort of geeky topic of conversation, but I think everybody kind of can see why it's important in a lot of ways. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a window into just travel demand models, how it's used in corridor studies, especially as we've got 3 different corridor studies coming up in this next year, where we'll have some public engagement in this area, and give you an idea of what's typical and what's a little bit different about how we're approaching those particular studies. And a lot really has to do with the socioeconomic data that comes from that DPC forecast and some of the things we're trying to do with that. Anytime we're talking about this idea of growth and development, though, I think it's really important to start off and be clear on, from the DelDOT perspective, it is not them that has a jurisdiction over deciding where development goes, but it is a key factor for future travel conditions and considerations of investment. And DelDOT certainly recognizes this. There's a lot of efforts that you probably know about, like the PLUS program, that look at monitoring and weigh in on different near-term developments. But we're going to focus a little bit more on the long-term end of things, and the way we look at the development and transportation in the future is a lot kind of taking the DPC forecast data that Dan was talking about and using it as an input for a travel demand model. So typically our corridor studies have this process where we kind of do this handoff from the DPC forecast input into the travel demand model, which is this bigger system-wide model for really the whole peninsula. And we look there at the overall demand how trips are getting produced. I'll get into a little bit of the 4 steps of that model, just to kind of break it down. Of course, there's always more you could say about it, but just to give you some basics tonight. And then that gets handoff then to a sort of local corridor model that simulates the traffic and things on that corridor. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But before I get started, I just want to kind of pose the question out there, maybe seem obvious to some. I thought it might be good just to ask, why do we model? And if anyone has a particular take.
Go ahead, Mike.
Mike Tyler, Bicycle Council. Where does cumulative impact figure into this? I mean, how do you know?
Mike, hold that question for a second. Let me just, because Ben posed a question to see, just hold that for 1 second. So why do we model? Does anyone want to take a stab at that? DJ?
Well, I'm assuming that you have some kind of calculated travel times and forecast based on population, workplace growth and that sort of thing. And you try to figure out the ways people are getting to and from work during the commuter peak hours. I think that's mainly what you're focusing on.
Yeah, generally. Yeah, Bob.
Well, technically you model because you can do math. Without modeling, you can't run, assessments. You have to have some structure. So that's what our communications people do. We have math models and we have croissant and arrival rates and things. So just about anything that's numeric, you have to create models that best represent what's actually happening and then populate that model. When Gene Donaldson was trying to figure out which traffic setting, which of the 6 or 7 or 10 or however many he has now that he uses on Route 1, he's using his modeling stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, generally, when you're looking 30 years out, no one exactly knows what's going to be there, but we need to be able to simulate somehow and make it. And really thinking about this decision support tools, a model you could say is decision support tool. It may not be the only thing we factor in. It may have some, biases or a methodology that doesn't account for everything. It'll be a crystal ball, but it really is the best thing we've got as far as trying to take what we know and put it into some rational thing and even look at what a future condition might be, rather than just saying, well, let's invest in this and see if it works, right? With models, you can do a little bit of this, seeing the future or a future, and we try to tease out what makes the most sense.
Yeah, can we just go to Mike's question there for a second?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if that discussion sort of got out what you were trying to, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm just concerned with your modeling is there's a lot of things happening everywhere else. And I don't know how you focus on what plans going on, let's say development, but what is all around and how's all that going to be impacted.
Yeah, well, let's see if maybe stepping through the steps of the model maybe helps a little bit of what gets factored in and the relationships of different things. So this slide probably has the most stuff on it going on, but it's also probably the most tied to Dan's presentation as far as what drives the demand in the model is that forecast, right? It's the future demand for trips. And this step of trip generation is really one where, it's just a count number where how many trips are we going to have out of this? Acting weird.
One of them's up, so they're seeing the other side.
Okay, I'm seeing one, but I think I should be seeing it.
Down Lewes.
Okay.
That's a model for 30 years.
Hold on, online, we're having a technical issue, we're working through it.
Yeah. That's between both and that's.
That's what we're here now.
Sure.
Check that out.
We're seeing how messy my desktop is.
Stop.
What city is that? Do you know? Porta?
They just did that.
Was that pedestrian when I talked about?
Yeah, completely pedestrian.
Yeah. Fortunate.
We should feel one of those other over the Lewes Canal.
Think so.
Dan, and now I'm getting nervous.
Hey, there it is.
Hey.
You shouldn't have sabotaged the presentation.
Still light out. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so just looking at the, all that's here on the screen, I was trying to talk about just the demand that comes from that forecast. But, Dan had said they do a number of different special tabulations of that, DPC projections. One of those is down to the TAZ or travel, analysis zone, also known as zone. The zones are these small geographies that you see in white with the black border there. That's a zone. And out of each zone, we have a forecast for how many households are going to be there, how many vehicles are going to be available to that households, how many retail employees are going to work in that zone, all those different things. And you can see on the map, each dot on the map is just going out to base year 2023 here. But for every dot, there's 25 households if it's teal, and 25 employees working there if it's plum color. And the model considers these, if it's a household, it's a production, right? It's going to produce trips that either stay in or leave that zone. And if it's employee working in that zone, it's an attraction. So say retail employment, there's observed data that tells us that, if you've got this many employees that are retail workers in the zone, you're likely to have a trip rate coming to that zone of X amount per employee. So that's the way it's kind of just started out, as just counting by trip and by trip type. So you might have a commute trip, you might have a trip to school, a trip to shop, etc. So we first off get this trip generation of just how many trips are going to come in, how many are coming out, and then we need to distribute those trips. So the second step is that distribution, taking it into origin and to a destination, but in a plausible way. So in the example of commute trips, we use observed data, like this is the distribution of census data in showing us how long people in Sussex County currently commute to work, and how it's essentially telling you how long they're willing to travel. And people do travel longer distances for work than other types of trips. So for every
In a high retiree area like Sussex County, you obviously have to have other reasons than work to travel too. So if you have half of your residents are retired, and some of them may be part-time employed, but you're
Right.
going to have, so you have, I mean, I know this is simplified, but do you take that into account for the elderly who are not employed when they're?
Right, so like a commute trip is largely driven by the amount of productions of commute trips in the first step is going to be largely driven by how many workers are in that zone. Right, and so in Sussex County, where you may not have as many workers relative to the households, you're going to have fewer commute trips out of that zone than say in Kenya, right?
I got you.
But that's just one of the types. So there might be shopping, there might be other types of trips, right? And certainly if you have a higher household size, you're going to have more. It's assumed that that's going to produce more school trips than a small household, right? So it's all by type, and they all get, this is just an example of commute because it tends to be something people kind of know and it's documented. But for all these different types, we kind of use this observed data and surveys and things that tell us this is likely the way, how long someone's going to travel for a trip of this type, etc. So it gets distributed. We know the origin and the destination. Now we need to figure out what mode they're gonna take to get there. And that's the mode choice step. I'm not gonna get into this in any great detail, but generally, it's gonna look at things like, you're not likely to be able to take a highway trip if you don't have too many vehicles available in your zone. Or you don't really have, transit, that connects zone to zone. So, it just is essentially something that's gonna assign some of those trips that we counted and some of those OD pairs. That'll be a transit trip, that'll be a highway trip, right? And there's different things about whether people are gonna be driving alone or carpooling, et cetera, using tolls, whether it be bus or rail, et cetera, how they got to their station. But that's all figured out in the mode choice step. Sorry. And then when we get to the network assignment, let's just say in this case, we're just looking at the highway end of things. We look at the highway network and say, okay, for all those highway trips that are gonna go from here to here, all in aggregate, we're gonna have to, it's almost like, all these people are just putting it into their GPS or Google Maps, and just the same way as you could say, I'm gonna go to this place, and it's gonna say, well, you should go this path. The travel model is gonna do the same things and understand that, well, if you go this path, there's likely some backup here. A certain percentage of people will reroute and they'll take another path. And it all kind of gets balanced out into this picture at a system-wide level. And this is just like a graphic of system, but we're talking, a full peninsula of results of the highway network. And it will sort of show these places where you have higher or lower volumes, likely freer flow speeds, or where you're getting delay and congestion.
So.
Yeah.
Riley, but maybe I'm misunderstanding what's being presented here, but it looks like to me that you're able to model 10, 20, 30 years into the future. And I think the biggest single frustration we have that I hear quite a bit is that the pace of growth is outstripping the pace of build out of the infrastructure. And yet the infrastructure is being roads, primarily roads. And so if we have modeling that looks 10, 20, 30 years out, I mean, how are we not utilizing this information properly or?
Well, I mean,
It's not every intersection, if I'm correct, because you don't have data for every intersection. Like a lot of, even when a project gets built, the traffic counts that the projects were built are usually antiquated by the time the project's built, because they're 10, 15 years old.
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily have the improvement for everything. We're just seeing the effect of the growth,
But
right?
all things being equal, if we're looking at this 10, 20, 30 years, I'm assuming all things being equal, 30 years, you're saying this is gonna be.
But, I'll use an example, that you've heard us talk about before, 20 years ago, DelDOT started a US 113 north-south study. And I remember it very well because the video that accompanied that, at the time it was Secretary Nathan Hayward, it was the time to act is now. Okay, we can see what's coming. We need to act now. We've got data, we've got anecdotal data, but we've got real hard data that's showing what's going to be happening. It's very hard, it's not just as simple as looking at this and going, we know where it's coming, because there's the public element, the policy element, and you can tell people all you want, hey, 20 years, just like, telling me 20 years ago, I should have, kept exercising and, and I don't, you don't always do what you should, you should do. So what happened with that study? It was hard to kind of get, even though we knew it was coming.
So it appears there's a breakdown somewhere in the process and there's a disconnect somewhere. Otherwise, we'd be able to perfectly project out where to put our resources.
Well, I would argue that what led to the 5 Points Transportation Study coming into existence is that for a long time, there was that disconnect down here where, people were saying, we don't need this, we don't need this. Suddenly, there was enough people that got together and said, we gotta do something.
Yeah.
And that's what's led to, and I'm summing up about 8 years of history in about 2 minutes here. But that, when we had Shantae here, secretary here, well, I guess it was Mark Lutz this year, but usually we're talking about the amount of investment that's now happening in Sussex. A lot of that is trying to catch up because we weren't able to do a lot of stuff over the last 20 years. There just wasn't the public will, the political will, whatever you make, but that seems to have shifted a little bit.
Well, the biggest thing I think is budget, right? And is there the funding to do it? And when you've got an aging road system and maintenance concerns and all these different things, it doesn't add up to, even if you can see all the problems, even if you calculate all the solutions that you need to invest in, you don't have the funds that support all that falling in line. So there's.
Sure, it's very hard to go to people. I'm thinking about farmers, I'm thinking about others and say, you know, hey, we're gonna plan something for here, for something we need in 30 years that, you know, suddenly there's an impact to you, you know, that's
It's like that east-west corridor that failed by one vote, 30 some years ago.
Yeah, so I would say in general too, that I think that, you know, part of the reason why we model is that with limited funds, you can kind of say, okay, what are gonna be the worst areas and what is the project that's gonna solve this?
There's a frustration level that, you know, you know all this, but yet somehow we're not providing the resources and the
Ben,
kind
let's try to keep moving the presentation.
I want to go to Center Hubsville.
Okay.
Well, I just want to talk about the financial aspect of it. I mean, if we had billions and billions more dollars, sure, no problem. But you have a limited amount of resources, even though we are spending more than we ever have before in Sussex County. You know, we're on that trend. We need to spend even more the next time. So
All right,
it's-
so thanks, Senator Hubsville. I want to keep these ideas. Let's try to get through the rest of his slides. And then we can come back and sort of try to sum up and see what conclusions and what takeaways we can reach as a result.
So with this, I'll just say that, you know, we get this system level view and this graphic next and just sort of saying, okay, if we're gonna go down to just the corridor, there's one corridor in the system, then we transfer the volumes that we get in the system on that corridor, all the approaches at these different intersections along the corridor. We move that into a corridor simulation model. And that's gonna give you a lot more detail. This is the fun model to watch where you can actually see cars and things moving. It's got a sense of, you know, things like the timing and the signals and things, adjustments that you can make. And then at that point, you can really make some recommendations of what are some solutions that will decrease some gridlock, perhaps at an intersection. Maybe, you know, if it's as simple as extending the green time and you can clear that queue, that's great. But if you've got, you know, something that's still not doing it, there might be more expensive investments to recommend. But this, when we do a corridor study, that model kind of informs different things that, you know, our experts have kind of evaluated and are putting out in front of the community to consider. Shifting kind of back to that original chart, what's sort of different about the approach we're taking in these upcoming corridor studies is that we are adding more than just the singular forecast into them. We're going to look at a range of potential future outcomes with development. And, you know, Dan gave a great presentation, and I think everybody who ever dealt with that data and understands it to be, you know, a reasonable and a well-informed forecast. But we also all know it's just one potential outcome. It might be the most, you know, in what we think is most likely. But it's not a crystal ball, as you said, and you know, we would like to sort of look at some range of things. So what if there's not, if there's more growth than is projected overall for the county for employment or households, you know, is the improvement we're going to recommend with the usual forecast going to be adequate? If there's less growth, was that improvement worth that investment? And then certainly if it happens in different PAVs, essentially the zones, right? Then predicted then maybe some of the demand and the patterns of things shift on the roadways. So what we're doing is starting to explore, this range of things, both at the dimension of pace of higher or lower overall growth, but then also pattern. To look at, here you have a graphic of the state strategies, these levels of 1 through 3, which are more urban to urbanizing, where the state wants to allocate more growth, and the level 4, which is more rural, and certainly the gray that's out of play for development. We've kind of started doing this approach where we're trying to translate that to this more forced zone geography. We generalize, what's the most predominant level in each zone. And we've got that displayed here on the map. I've also got the 3 border studies that are coming on the map here, and those planning districts that Dan was mentioning, these larger geographies, just for some orientation. And if you look at again, another dot density map, but this is sort of these productions and attractions of the future. This is the growth from 2023 in our base year to 2050. Each dot now is 15 households if it's teal and 15 employees if it's plum. This is what our standard forecast from the DPC looks like. We know, of a lot of concern to locals in this area is a lot of these growth zones that, there's development plans being proposed that maybe weren't factored into the forecast when it was developed a couple of years ago that we're using. And so to acknowledge that, we are kind of doing this adjusted forecast where some of these developments are more factored in. So we're essentially kind of shifting, if you're still looking here now at the standard DPC projections, we kind of borrow from other non-key growth zones throughout the county, keep the same household and employment totals. But I'm going to shift it now to the adjusted forecast, and you'll see more dots going into those key growth zones essentially. So this is the standard DPC, this is the adjusted. So marginal change in the outer areas, a lot more concentration to account for those developments in those key growth zones. And then the other 2 patterns that we've been exploring so far is, what if we go more compact and concentrate more on the 1s, 2s, and 3s, or what if we go more sprawling in the future in development pattern and more concentrated or spread out into those white borders.
Can I interrupt you for a
Yeah.
minute? So to kind of connect the dot, Councilman, to what you were saying, is DelDOT has done it the old way for many years. And what is new and is underway right now is this revision of trying to be a little bit more accurate about knowing those trips are gonna originate where we're seeing these developments that we've been talking about today. So the outputs, we're still working on cranking the numbers and making it through so that the upcoming corridor studies are better informed and a little bit more accurate to all the proposals y'all are seeing on the ground. So this is kind of like the new and improved version of doing things. And Austin, you may have some more context there.
I was actually going to say something just actually about the presentation itself, that if you're flipping through the slides on your own, you're probably not seeing Ben sequence through some of the changes as easily. So I think it would be helpful to watch the dots move that
Yeah.
slides through it. It might be easier
I'll just do
to
it.
visualize what he's talking about.
Thing, Austin, yeah, it's almost like, I think of this as an eye exam, when they put the lens in front of you and you're like, 1 or 2. So this is the standard DPC, and then this is if I switch into the adjusted, you can see more concentration. Mary.
Excuse me 1 sec. Can we get people at the table, if you don't mind, not to talk during the presentation? It's really hard to concentrate. So, thank you.
Can I interject this too? As the factor that we are constantly up against is the baseline zoning for the entire county, it's 2 units the acre. So case in point, there was a letter or editorial to the Cape Gazette last week. And the point of the editorial was regarding Cool Spring, the new development proposed, that Sussex County should just say no.
Right.
Well, I mean, with taking the risk of being flip, I mean, that's not one of the check marks on the decision-making process. I mean, because we could say no, and they can go out and they can build, 1,400 units in the middle of a cornfield with nothing to support it. Or we can condition the heck out of it, and agree to their more robust proposal that includes commercial and so forth. But in either scenario, no's not the option. Now, I've had discussions with Councilman Gruba on, I always get that wrong. But, phasing is something we're looking at, particularly in zone 4, things like that. But we're kind of short on tools that are going to slow this thing down. The market is driving, and as your previous numbers demonstrated, the baby boom generation is still in retirement mode. It will be for a little while. And so therefore market forces are going to continue to drive this. So east of Route 5, east of Route 30, particularly 5, is in the process of urbanizing. And I feel a level of frustration that we're limited on what we can do to mitigate that. You see the same problem, I know.
Yeah, no, I mean, good comment. I want to get to the end of this, but Bill?
So, but the one thing I see here, Bill, is they, DelDOT's looking at these areas and you're looking at new key gross those based on your estimates. Yet that's falling into a 4 for the state investment level, which is where the top comes down and says, okay, here's your financing, here's where we're going to put towards the growth. So is there a discussion that they're looking at your transportation models here now to, change some of those investment zones, or is that all going to still be a problem in the end?
Well, there might be a recommendation from the working group in there, not. Stay tuned.
I'm gonna carry on to just finish this up, but so so we've got this adjusted projection that kind of gets us with a certain new baseline, considering these developments that I think will help when we're doing public outreach, that like a lot of people think these are gonna happen, so if they're not there, people are gonna not take it as credible. But for the remaining growth, beyond that, we've done some exercise of what if it's a little bit more compact beyond these developments, or where if it's more sprawling. So I'll show you just quickly. This is switching to the compact. I go back to the adjusted baseline. So this is moving into the reds and the oranges more, right? And going back and forth again, but just getting a lot more, concentration in certain areas and less so in the white. And then this is our sprawl, which goes a lot more into the right. So that's compact. This is sprawl. So just to give you a flavor, because we want to get a little bit more of a range of things, and this is my last slide, is just to say, we want to understand it a little bit more. What are the risks and the implications of them? And recognize too that, like I started with, DelDOT doesn't set the policy on land use, but it is an important knob that can change. And if the public wants to use that knob, that's a process that they can get into with their local county or municipal governments. At the same time, we're going to look at the menu of options available to us on the transportation ends for a variety of scenarios to just understand that better. And hopefully this gives the public a little bit more ideas of various ways to advocate in the future that they want. So that's what I have for you today. Thanks for a lot of good comments already, but I don't know how much time we had for the question.
We got a question or two. I will say that those two presentations were a little different than some of the presentations we've done. I mean, oftentimes we'll come and say, we're focused on this construction project here, or, things that you're seeing, we thought it was a good time to have that type of conversation, that we want to always continue to educate and inform this group and put you all in a better position to, if not understand all this stuff. I mean, this is a lot of deep stuff to understand, at least be aware of all this. So anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question, I want to go to you guys first, but if not, I'll take one or two from, okay, DJ?
So I think Councilman Raleigh, were you talking more about intersections, like specific intersections?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm talking like Route 9, Route 24,
Right, but like even intersections off of those, like.
Well, the intersections are clearly.
So, because what I think you're saying, you plan 10, 20, 30 years, but you don't have a level of service report for 10, 20, 30 years for every intersection in the state of Delaware. It's on an as-needed basis, from the way I understand it, when you get corridor studies or when you get requests for, or TIDs and that.
There's no system level solution. It takes getting into that quarter model and looking at specifics to be able to generate the kinds of solutions that we think are plausible and get fed it to the public and all that sort of stuff. So we don't have like a forecast of what it'll take or what it will cost to do all these things exactly.
Right, so it's more of a data, you don't necessarily have the data answer, like there was a question that Cancel asked, well, what's the level of service within 5 miles of this development for every intersection? You guys have TID data, you have TIS data, but you don't necessarily have data on every intersection within 5 miles of the development.
That's not what the private man, the municipal model is.
Right. But I think that's some of the disconnect that we're talking about. You're talking about more on a global level, where they're talking about more on a local level. So, and also the state strategies, to me, that's not a good thing to be using, because the state strategy is what drives the comp plans, but the comp plans are what should be used. And are we assuming the highest and best use for each parcel on a comp plan on a corridor? Because that's what we should be doing. Because that's what can basically legally be proposed for rezoning. Because we told them, if it says this is a commercial area or this is a development area, and they can build 100,000 square foot or whatever. If we're not assuming that, then that's part of the way we're getting behind the 8 ball.
But you can't predict that.
But then that what the comp plan is supposed to do?
If somebody comes forward with changes zone request.
No, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that's different when I'm asking if we're actually using the comp plan. So I'm coming in with a by right plan. I don't have to do a change in zone. I can go right to planning.
So I mean, we're getting into a development conversation, which isn't really, I think, the focus of what I want to.
I think you're kind of missing the point. We're saying that
From
the
a plan-
cumulative effect of all these developments is not being considered. Even on a planning level, on a comp plan level, I don't have to have an application. I can look at the comp plan and tell you in a 5 mile area what the development of every highest and best use of every property is. We have that ability to do that. It takes work. You gotta use ITE, you gotta do trip distributions, you gotta do trip assignment. It's work, but it can be done.
Bob, I'm gonna move us on. I need to get to Sarah. We got 2 more presentations and we've had.
I put my question in advance and you're not gonna let me ask it in 10 seconds.
I'm not.
The data is contradictory.
Bob, thank you.
When the data is contradictory, you need to ask.
Respect, come on, we've worked together a long time. I've always given you a lot of leeway.
Fine, move on.
We're gonna move on. Thank you.
You heard what I said. The data that he just
Hey,
presented
Bob,
in front.
being disrespectful right now, okay?
Thank you all.
You're being very disrespectful to everyone in the room and our entire process, so.
It's perfect.
Thank you, subject.
Good evening, my name is Sarah Coakley, I'm principal planner with Delaware, and I manage our transportation improvement districts. And I believe that there's some new folks here on the working group, and there may also be members of the public here as well. So I wanted to review what a study is. So it's a geographic area defined for the purpose of securing the required improvements to transportation facilities in that area. And it's a place where land use and transportation is planned in detail in advance, such that development consistent with that planning can pay a readily determined fee and forgo the traffic impact study process. So normally when a new development comes in, if it's generating at least 50 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips, then the development has to do a traffic impact study. They have to, collect updated traffic counts and look at, 3 intersections out from each of their entrances and basically, at the impact of their development. And then, Delaware works with them to identify needed improvements that they may make contributions towards. With a TID, we work with the local government to do the planning ahead of time. And, when it says that the land use and transportation plan is done in detail, basically it has to be a parcel specific land use forecast. So looking at what each parcel could be, and do look at the comp plan for that, and the zoning, and also the comprehensive plan. The development forecast, and then, that gets modeled, and then we use the results of that to identify the needed improvements. And the purpose of the TID is to better provide the transportation improvements that are needed to support land development that's consistent with the comprehensive plans. So there are a lot of benefits to creating a TID. One is the comprehensive infrastructure planning. So it goes further out than just like 3 intersections of a single development. It looks at all the development in the area. TID projects advance in our CTP. They actually get extra points in the capital transportation program prioritization process. Also, the fees stay local. Legally, they can only be used for the improvements identified and agreed upon in the TID agreement between Delaware and local government. And so they can't be directed to anything else. Also, there is more equitable treatment of competing developers. So that the regular TIS process, some developments will come in, and they'll use the capacity of the roadway. And then the last development in will end up having to make all the contributions to the improvements because they're just the last ones in. Also, the smaller developments sometimes don't have to make any contributions, and then that leaves the larger ones to handle all of the costs. So with the TID, it spreads the costs out to everyone. Also, it allows there to be known costs for developers. They don't have to go through the TIS process, which can take 6 to 9 months. To find out basically what they have to do to meet requirements. They pay the fee and they know what they're going to have to do at a time. So there are 7 TIDs in operation in Delaware right now, another 7 under development. In Sussex County, there's one in the southeast part of Milford, Henlopen, and then you have 2 under development, one in the town of Henlopen, and then the one in the Roxanne area, basically it's in like southeast Sussex, just west of the shore municipalities that are there, and Roxanne Road, that's it. So for the Henlopen TID, it was established in 2020 after more than 3 years of planning coordination between Delaware and the county. It's about 24 square miles, the largest in operation, the second largest after the Magnolia TID that's also under development now. And it's more than 50 intersections and approximately 47 road miles. And factoring inflation since 2020, the cost of the improvements are estimated to be about $321 million, with developers expected to contribute about 24% of those costs.
And for those who followed this process for a long time, I mean, when we first started back in 17, 18, this was all in development, and, kind of came into fruition, as Sarah just pointed out, back in 2020. The area for the TID is slightly different than our area of kind of 5 points. It covers a broader area, right? You kind of see up in
Here, so yeah, it's a larger area, but then it's also different. It doesn't include anything north of Route 1. It's entirely south or west.
I think the
TIDs.
Yeah, on this particular one.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's coincidental or you've seen it, or if we've seen it in other places, but we've seen a pretty significant uptick in development just outside the TID. And, the concern is that, they're going to reap the benefits of the improvements, but not necessarily be paying the freight.
So, Sarah, do we see that, or, in some of the other experiences that there's, that someone tries to, I don't want to say being the system, but tries to.
Could be coincidental, I don't know.
Well, I'm asking. Yeah.
So, I mean, we don't know the motives or anything, but we are seeing in Henlopen specifically, and then also outside of West Town, the Middletown, increased development just outside. So we are working on, like, looking at our codes and regulations to see if we can identify ways of, basically trying to further incentivize development to be in the TIDs and, you know, basically increase the contributions that development would have to pay just outside. We're almost doing like a, tiered approach with fees, because you're right, they are absolutely benefiting from the TID, but not paying for it.
I mean, developer will tell you that they build where land is available for that, you know, and that they're always looking and struggling to find the next project site, you know. So it could be just coincidental, but it's a concern, worth looking at, yeah.
Yeah, it is a concern and we are looking at it.
Keep going, yeah, sorry, that's
That's okay. So we've had 30 agreements signed and recorded with individual property owners and developers. That's an increase from 21 last year. Another 5 developer agreements are in process. And the TID funds collected $2.5 million in developer contributions. That's an increase up from 960,000 last year. And like payments are coming in now on a regular basis, like dozens of lots a month, basically. So that's good news. And then another 1 million developer rate of dedication for construction commitments for basically for longer frontage. And they do not get credit for their entrance improvements. So this is things outside of their entrance, like adding shoulders or widening out the travel lane. Twin lanes, they don't get credit for. There are, well, about a third of the improvements identified by the Henlopen TID were in the fiscal year 21 to 25 CTP. And so now I'm going to provide updates on those projects as well as projects that have been added to our more recent CTPs. So Airport Road Extension, the part from Old Landing Road to Sabre 24, preliminary engineering is underway. Also the part of US 9 widening from Old Vine Road east Route 1, design of that is underway. For Plantations Road, phase 1 is substantially complete. The final paving is supposed to be completed before this summer, and phase 2 is in design. For Old Landing Road and Warrington Road intersection, that improvement is on hold until Airport Road Extension is operational, and we can get updated traffic counts to see if there's been any improvement to that intersection. Beaver Dam Road widening from State Route 1 to Dairy Farm Road, that's in our current CTP, and with preliminary engineering to begin fiscal year 2026. Shady Road and coastal lane improvements, and also Noble Road extension from Cedar Grove Road to US 9 are in the current capital transportation program, with preliminary engineering to begin in fiscal year 28. US 9 widening, basically phase 2 from Old Vine out to Dairy Farm Road, that's in the current CTP for project development in fiscal years 27 and 28. So the difference there is like preliminary engineering, basically we're ready to do survey, right of way acquisition and plans, whereas project development, we still need to do planning and NEPA for that. State Route 24 between Creek Bridge and Indian Mission Road, that's also in our current CTP for project development, fiscal year 28. And I should say that like these projects are in the CTP using like state and federal funding, but as the Henlopen TID account grows and more funding is collected, then the we'll be working with Sussex County to come to agreement which projects to use the TID funding for, but it could possibly move these up to to be done sooner than otherwise. On the DelDOT website under programs and then transportation improvement districts, there's a link to the statewide TID dashboard. And basically it keeps like a running tally of the costs of implications of plan improvements. On the left-hand side, you can select a TID, and for those that are operational, it'll zoom in and you can actually click an intersection or segment, and it'll give you the status of what's recommended for that location, and also the status of it, whether it's a design, construction, or planning. And then on the right side of the screen, it has costs, and then also a breakdown of the type of intersection improvements, whether it's a roundabout, all-way stop, or traffic signal. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions about the TID? Yeah, DJ?
So with the TIDs, I know the original Henlopen TID wasn't done necessarily like this, but moving forward, are we, like I was referencing earlier with the comp plan, are we assuming highest and best use for each property within the TID? For the, was it 2045, is that the future years?
Yeah, so for both the, so we're working with the county on, TRD in the Roxanne area, and then also with the, town of Milton for one in the Milton area. And so that one with the town, we're using the county's, land use forecast and the county's comp plan, because basically the annexation area of the town matches the like town center growth area in the county's comp plan. And so we're using that, we're using what's in the comprehensive plan. And then, Jamie Whitehouse and his team, planning and zoning for Roxana, they also used the comp plan for the forecast for Roxana.
Okay. And then when developers pay, so basically it's the 24%, the state share is usually 15% on safety projects, I think, and then 20% on capital projects. So when that TID money goes towards that state share, what happens to that state money that was previously allocated towards those projects?
So I know what we have been planning to do so far and what we have been doing with like Southern Newcastle County and West Town TIDs that are already operational is we've been using the TID funding to go towards like preliminary engineering and design, railway acquisition.
It stays, that's where my question is, it stays within the TID, it's just not distributed throughout the state.
So it can only be used for that specific TID.
Well, I know those TID monies can, but I guess what I'm asking is, so it frees up the money it frees up, that money is then being used within the TID.
Yeah, I mean, that money can be
Okay.
used in projects anywhere, basically.
Anywhere or anywhere within that TID?
I mean, if we're using TID money, like.
I'm not, see, that's what I'm wondering, if there's a disconnect, we're saying it's all staying with the TID, but,
Well, we'll get back to you on that.
okay, because it's a very important question.
Well, and that's why we want to get it right.
Okay,
You know, I don't want to.
well, I feel like she knows the answer.
I don't know. So,
I mean, but typically we don't like, we don't just like trade around dollars, like it would be just whatever.
Right, so that basically, there's a certain pool of money for state funding, and there's that 15 and 20% is going to each year to CTP. So if that money gets freed up, there's a column, the other column in the CTP. The developer money goes into the other column, and then that 20% column can be reduced based on the other column, and then that money goes back into the generic CTP, which is distributed throughout the state, is my understanding.
If it's money that's from the developer for a TID, for a development within the TID, that developer money stays within that TID.
I
If
understand.
it's CTP, other CTP monies, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, that should be that.
So, right, but all this developer money is not staying in the Henlopen TID. All that 20% money is getting freed up, say 60% of it's going to Newcastle County.
No, it can only be used
Right.
for projects that are in the.
So that 20%, so you're accounting that 20% when that gets freed up. So let's just say developer pays $2 million. We just freed up $2 million for Route 9 widening. In the state pool of money, where does that $2 million state pool get reallocated for Route 9 widening?
I mean, I don't think it would. I think basically we're budgeting based on using the TID funding.
Right.
DJ, I just feel like we're going down a rabbit hole that I'm not sure we're gonna get out of here. I mean, I think we understand your point. Let us talk.
I know the answer, I'm just trying to hear it.
Well, that's fine, but, yeah, we're gonna gather if we need to follow up with you, but,
Okay.
you know, we want to make sure, it's a good question. I want to make sure we get a really accurate response back out.
Yeah, I just think it's a procedural breakdown.
I understand. Any other questions for Sarah before we move on? Okay, Leah? Thanks, Sarah.
So we're gonna be a little lighter on detail tonight on the implementation plans. Our focus is the annual report. So I know we have some relatively new members with us, as well as some new folks in the audience. So every year in April, we publish an annual report for the previous calendar year. So if you go online right now, you will see as part of the meet, and you all have it in your meeting packets, the annual report for this previous year. And what that does is breaks down essentially all of the stuff we talked about. All last year is broken down in a very detailed format. Every single one of the 78 recommendations is described in the appendix as to the current status. So we're here tonight, obviously speaking with you. We will also have our in-person workshop scheduled for Wednesday, May 21st. So for members of the public or folks you may think of your constituents who are interested in this, we can get into a little bit more detail at that public workshop. And we'll also be publishing an online video that gets into the detail with that. So in the report, you'll see a number of graphics that track our implementation status by year. So you can see we've come a long way here. The dark green bar represents recommendations that are totally complete. So we've made significant headway, but as we've been discussing, we're kind of down to the hard nuts to crack. So we're down to the remaining recommendations that are either in progress or still to be initiated, or kind of the bigger things to get done. So we will continue, of course, to do so, to continue working on those to be initiated and in progress categories. Ones that are described as ongoing are kind of changes in process that will be moving forward more in perpetuity. So we do get into a little bit more shades of gray with the in progress ones. So just shared, some of these are in design, meaning they're in the CTP. There's actually engineering going into them, whereas some are just in planning. So again, this is all documented in that report. Reflecting back, we also take a look at kind of our notable achievements for the preceding year. This year we have 2 major capital projects completed, the coastal highway intersection improvements, along with the 24 improvements between Loves Creek and Mulberry Knoll Road. We launched our new study website, which we do hope is a little bit more easy to navigate and accessible for you as well as members of the public. Wanted to give a shout out to the county for ordinance 3061. We spoke about that a little bit last time we met. That essentially is accomplishing a big goal that this group has, and a lot of other planning studies have looked at, is improving interconnectivity between parcels, not just for motor vehicles, but also for folks who are traveling by other modes. So that's a big one and a big update to the development coordination process. What's that?
Still a battle.
It's still a battle, but every little bit helps as we're all pulling in the same direction to improve quality of life. And also, we launched a data collection plan for the 5 Points intersection. So, annually, every summer, we're going to be out there collecting traffic data. So as all of these projects and investments come online, we have an understanding of how that's impacting things, right? And that's kind of, I think, gets at the crux of what we heard about from Ben and even Sarah is, these new projects are going to change how people travel. They're going to change people's behavior, and they may change how the development community responds, right? We've seen folks develop in certain areas. So all of that, these pieces, we want to keep an eye on how that impacts our primary mandate, which is really addressing the 5 Points intersection. So we had a very broad, far-ranging conversation tonight about bigger trends in the region, but again, to bring it back to this group's focus. I think part of why we wanted to have Ben up here talking about the modeling piece is because that is also going into the Route 9 study. Obviously, 5 Points is the eastern edge of that Route 9 corridor. That is a big priority for the department. That's why we wanted you all to hear what's been going on behind the scenes. We've been working hard, and we want to make sure that we're bringing the best data we can to that effort, and that will feed into our monitoring of the intersection as well. One priority for 2025, again, because we are kind of at the hard ones to do, we're really focusing. Last year we said we were going to do this, we did not. We did talk about it a little bit, looking at eliminating unsignalized crossovers. We want to do a little bit of a more structured look at that. By and large, we think it's a bad idea. A lot of folks rely on those unsignalized crossovers to distribute their trips evenly, but we do want to make sure our traffic folks take a look at that and bring conclusions in a more systemic way to you all to look at. So, I think many of you who have been with us along for the ride, our 78 recommendations are grouped into some broad categories described here. And, the top one, the gray category recommendations under current projects, those are all but one is done. And then I think most of our remaining, actually, let's go to the easy chart. most of the remaining kind of long in progress are in our multimodal improvements category, which is the red one. So there you can see 10 of those are in progress right now. So that's a lot of what we're working on right now, as well as category B, so to toggle back, that's policies to improve beautification, efficient, sustainable systems, et cetera. So we're gonna keep next year coming out and presenting to these all on you, to each of you, as we move forward. I did want to return to the big picture here and our real focus of, recommendation E1 of studying the feasibility of a grade separation at 5 points. We know things have changed a lot. That is still part of this, what we're working towards here, as well as looking at that east-west traffic as a system. So we're still on that. And again, to highlight all the investments kind of around the intersection that are coming online. Phase 1, Plantation Road, obviously is about done. That roundabout's open. Folks are using that, as well as the new southbound exit off of 1 to get over to 9. The big one that's coming, and we had Mark out here last meeting speaking to this, was Minus Conway. So that's gonna have that new east-west opportunity for folks to get in and out of Lewes. So that's the one we really may impact how folks are moving through the intersection. The first time I presented this chart for you, construction completion was a little bit more staggered. We've updated that. Some projects are being pushed a little later than we originally anticipated, but they're still happening within time for us to continue our strategy of doing our summer counts and fall analysis with the goal of moving towards a report on the 5 points intersection and feasibility there by 2029 or so. Awesome.
And I mean, this process will stay the same, but these timelines can still shift. So
Yep.
just keep that in mind.
We all know how construction goes. So, with that, we, kind of our implementation plan is same as it has been. We're all gonna keep working on those recommendations. You know, we will leave that report slightly shy of finalized in case any of y'all see any issues or edits or comments on things or clarifications. And we will be bringing it out to that workshop in a couple of weeks. Please, we rely on you all to drive attendance at that. As we have done in previous years, we speak to 5 points, but we also have stations around the room from our colleagues. So Jamie Whitehouse will be there with his staff representing the county. We'll have also, it's going to be jointly information about the SR1 Low Stress Bikeway Study. It's kind of a co-workshop, so there'll be information there about that effort, as well as Brian Behrens and his crew from Project Development South to speak on any of the active CTP projects. So folks can get one-on-one time with them. They'll be able to pull up drawings, answer questions about those projects. So I think, Sarah, you're going to be out addressing questions about the TID. So we'll have a series of stations. So folks can kind of come in, we'll have a brief presentation speaking to the annual report, and then it'll be, folks can kind of drop around and talk to where they have questions and concerns. So
If you're getting questions, that's a good place to direct people to come to kind of.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning priority for 2025, looking at eliminating the unsignalized crossovers. And I'm not sure if it was part of the conversation, but at least we're reducing the number of conflicts in some of those, like we did at Cape Neck Road, where you got rid of the southbound the southbound U and the crossover there. I think that greatly impacted the safety there. There's a few others that I think should be looked at, or at least maybe not eliminating altogether, but at least like imminently, like look at some of these, because I remember in some previous conversations, we talked about like 32 different conflict points in an intersection. These are 32 different conflict points in an unsignalized intersection. So I think if we could reduce some of those northbound U's or southbound U's or whatever would make sense, the traffic pattern would be greatly appreciated.
if you have any specific locations in mind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, please shoot us, and that goes for everyone, because if we'll have to start somewhere, and we'll start with the intersections that have the most, interest from you all, so please.
Check the crash data.
Yes, that is a big piece of it as well.
Yes, Mike?
Yeah, two things I'm concerned about. If I'm coming south on Route 1, and I want to make a left turn on Route 9, there are 2 lanes, right lane and the left lane. The right lane really backed up. the guy in the right lane, the right lane backs up, the guy in the left lane, we turn around and he cuts over, he cuts me off.
Like, just like, sorry, Michael, so you're talking about the left turn
You
lane.
got turn,
You're talking about the left turn lane
left turn.
and then the right turn lane. Okay, keep going.
But this has happened to me many times. He cuts you out, or he cuts you off, or he stops traffic because he wants to get in that right lane. Is there any way to say that you can't get out of that lane? You must stay in that lane.
Because it's a merge, it's merging from two lanes to one.
No, not, you have two lanes to go left and one to go straight. Right?
You're going west on 9,
Oh, you're
Yeah,
going west on
west.
that, I thought you were something
No,
out.
going west.
west on 9.
Oh, so you're going west on that, okay.
That's a concern, and I've seen it happen too many times. And of course, there's a big wide road there, and they'll race, and the guy will go straight.
I'm gonna, after we wrap up, I'm gonna come over and make sure I understand exactly where you're talking about. Because I know, last time we had marked out, there are still some ongoing improvements to that section of 9 and additional widening that's happening to address some of those issues. And I believe those have not been implemented yet. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about the exact same spot, but I think the department's aware of the location and is gonna be making some changes to address that.
All right, the other concern I have as a cyclist coming out of Lewes, I can't turn left to get onto Beaver Dam Road safely. Because of all what I just told you about, and there's really no bike lane that lets me stay there, go left. There's no positioning.
Bike box is the only thing. A bike box is probably the only thing.
DJ, you gotta speak up.
A bike box is probably the only thing that could.
Yeah,
potentially do that.
there's no safety.
So this is from West 9 on.
Yeah, if I don't wanna go on Route 9, I wanna go to Beaver Dam Road.
Yep.
Or even wanna go to Plantation Road, I can't do that because it's just not safe.
You're trying to access the roundabout.
Yeah,
From the signal.
yeah, to access,
Yeah, from the signal to the
but it's
roundabout.
not a safe position as a cyclist. I don't feel safe in that intersection.
He has to be in the left turn lane now.
In one of those lanes, yeah.
Appreciate the comment,
I'm
Mike.
gonna I'll touch base with you. I wanna just make sure I have the exact spot on the map.
Bob, I was gonna come to you. We got a couple minutes before I go to public comments. Do you want to make your comment from earlier?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, and I meant no disrespect to any member here, and I apologize for my assistance. But
Okay, let's go to your point.
on modeling, early, I saw evidence that by 2050, there would be a decrease in the demand. But yet, in the later development, it appeared like there was an increase in the demand. And I thought that the conversation about the demand is actually going to be driven by where the land is and how it is used. My concern is that in taking different approaches to modeling, getting back to the number of people we're going to be in the state in 2050, I saw the early data indicated to me that that was going to actually decrease after achieving a peak in around 2032. And at that point, it would be actually negative. The growth in population, which of course does drive traffic demand, would be declining. Now, if I misunderstood, I can show you the chart that shows that.
Why don't we, get you with,
Okay, but, and then, so you can't use the projections of growth if those are erroneous. In other words, if you're saying we're going to have more people on the roads, when in fact we're going to have less who live here, not counting the summer traffic. So if I misunderstood.
yeah, why don't we'll get some clarity for you.
All right, that was my question.
I will
All right,
say,
so-
the numbers going into the model are from, like, its population consortium numbers are feeding into the model. So they are 1-to-1. And then if we were looking at there's like Ben, please, but there's like a 1% differential on the sprawl and compact scenarios. So we can answer that for you, and we can even circle back and offer some more clarification.
25 years ago, the population model said that this area would be a foot or two underwater, and it hasn't happened.
All right.
When the model is not right, all of the things that you do on it are at risk, and we're talking about billions of dollars of expenditures here. That's my point.
And I'm glad that only took 10 seconds.
I apologize, unrelated, but I'm curious. the Millsboro bypass seems like it's making excellent progress. The, estimate.
I do not know.
Yeah, we can get an update for you.
Yeah, I'd love to get it.
Okay,
Seems like it's quick, by the way.
yep, I want to get to public comment, but yes.
On Route 24, there's a development proposed that's pretty significant. It's very close to the Love Creek Bridge, and, could you refresh my memory around when that's going to be dualized? I think I saw a forecast for when it's going to happen that's pretty far out.
So there is a corridor study along SR 24 as well as a capital project.
There's no committed fund or plan for dualization of that bridge.
All
Okay.
right,
Sorry, is there a plan committed for dualizing that bridge?
fair.
No, the TID to identify it as needed, around 2040.
2030.
And that is why the department has allocated funds for a corridor study and why again, this relates to everything we've been talking about tonight and the model and to Bob's point, the need for an accurate model, right? So it's all on the radar.
And I asked the question because, we have a shortage of workforce housing. There's a development that includes a substantial amount of that. But we also need roads that are adequate to support the people who live there and what commercial development is also proposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I want to move us on to public comment. We got a comment earlier online. Can you read it off?
Yeah, and this is for Dan.
This is all the way back at the beginning.
Comment was from Sandy. It's migration in can be presented by planned developments being built or predicted. I'm sorry, let me read it again because there was a correction. Migration in can be predicted by planned developments being built. No.
No. Right. No, you can't, that couldn't be, no.
Okay, the answer is no to that question.
Okay, any member of the public that's here, have a comment? Just kind of come up as close to the table as you can, just state your name and we'll give you a brief comment.
Hey, my name's Alan Roth. I live on Kings Highway in Lewes. Relax, I'm gonna be nice. Not like the last few months.
It's okay. Go for it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay. 3 months ago, I came here, I was very angry about the way project on Kings Highway was handled. I just wanted to say thank you to the people at Del Dot, because I guess maybe a month or two ago, you came back and did some more work on Kings Highway. I think several of the people who I was very angry at aren't here tonight, so you can convey my message back to those folks. They were the ones responsible. But apparently, all the work that was done, or most of the work that was done at night. We had no problems. Worked out beautifully. Thank you. I just hope, I still don't like the idea of 5 roundabouts. I think it's crazy, but if you're gonna go ahead and do it, if you're gonna go ahead and do it, take a lesson, please, do the work at night. All right,
Great.
thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. I don't think we have any other public members here. There's no other comments online, right? Okay, so you want to go back into the meeting, DJ?
I was trying to answer a question, not, I think we.
You want what?
Just want to ask a question.
Yeah, one more question.
Okay, so the data collection for the 5 Points area, how is that being done? Because it's not done with demand volumes and only service volumes are counted at the intersections. It's completely worthless.
We can take that offline and I can connect you, I can talk to our traffic engineers. I'm not one, so I'm not gonna stand up here.
Okay, and if Bluetooth data is being used, the last time I pressed the Bluetooth data, somebody was making a decision, well, it never takes somebody 10 minutes to get Surf Bagel to Home Depot, so they must have stopped somewhere, and we're just throwing that data out. Well, I think we can all tell you it can take 10 minutes to get from Surf Bagel to Home Depot sometimes, so I would think that they shouldn't be throwing any of that Bluetooth data out and assuming it's all real. Because if you are, you're removing some of the congestion from the data and making it seem rosier.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, not in our interest to downplay any of the issues going on out there.
Yeah, I'm just going to take one that.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all being here. Thank you to the people who joined us online. We're going to wrap up. As Leah said, our next meeting is I don't even like to put the date up because it means summer's over, so, but October 27th, we'll certainly get you reminders, but I hate looking at dates that far in advance. But again, thank you for your question, your discussion. Thank you to our presenters. Dan, thank you for coming down from New Mexico. Good night, everyone.